it's Christy. Welcome back to my channel and welcome to day 8 of my 2023 holiday card series. Today I'm going to be making a card using Lawn Fawn's Winter Birds and Bah Humbug. So I've stamped the images I'm using on some Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock with Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink, and I'll be coloring with my Copic markers. So I'm going to start by coloring in my cardinals, and I wanted to do a male and a female. So I'm starting with the male, and I'm using R24, R29, and R39 for most of his body, using that R39 at the top of the head where it would be darkest, and then also on the tips of the wings and on the tail. And then I'm going to blend that out with the R29. Then I'm bringing in R24 to take that even further, and that's when I realized that I was going to need a 4th shade on the body because I just wanted there to be a lot of contrast. So I'm going to bring in R22 to finish that off. Now I did oversaturate my paper a little bit because the blend was not completely how I wanted it, and I did want to put a little shadow on the underside of the wing. So I went back and added in some extra red, and red is notorious for bleeding outside the lines. So you're going to notice that it's creeping into his face a bit. And normally if I were coloring like a light colored face, I would be more concerned and want to fix that with my colorless blender right away. But because these are cardinals and I'm going to be coloring the face black, I just didn't worry about it, and it's going to be covered up just fine in the final images. For the female cardinal, I had never colored one before, so I Googled images and I saw that they were kind of this combination of cream and gray and red. So I'm adding in the red on the top of the head and the tips of the wings and the tail, but I only started with the R24 and then blended out with the R22. And then while I still have these colors out, I'm going to use the darkest 3 shades to color in that bow, so we have a nice vibrant Christmas pop of red in one other place on this card. I'm also going to do their beaks with just the lightest 3 shades there because cardinals do have red beaks if you Google the pictures. And then I'm moving back to the male's face, and I'm going to use N1, N3, and N5. I'm being a little bit heavy-handed with that N5 just because I'm trying to cover up that little bit of bleeding over the line. And then I'm going to blend that out with the N3 and then the N1. I'm using the same shades for the female's face as well. And I am going to go over the male's face with a second layer, but I'm going to let that dry in between, and then I'll just do that off screen because I wanted to deepen up that darker area and still cover up that little bit of bleeding, but I did not want to oversaturate the paper. And then I also added a bit of N5 and N3 to the darkest areas of the male cardinal. And then for the female cardinal, I'm switching to the N3 and adding a little bit of gray in the areas where the male cardinal has them, just in the softer tones, blending that out with the N1. And I'm going to kind of transition from there into the creamy tones. So for that, I'm going to use E40, E41, and E42. So I'm blending out the gray with the E42. And also on the edge of the pink. And I'll go back and kind of smooth that out in just a minute, but I'm going to blend out the E42 with the E41, and then we'll add a little bit of E40 in there on the lower part of the face and the top of the belly. Then, like I said, I'm going back to that R22, and this time I'm going to add in some R20 to help blend it into that creamy tone. So just working back over that area once it's had a little bit of time to dry to smooth out the blend. And then I went back to the E41 to smooth those transitions a little bit better. And then I'm going to use that R22 to add some rosy cheeks to both of these cardinals. Then I'm going back to the lightest 2 shades of those creamy tones, the E40 and E41, to do the little berries, which are going to become mistletoe on my scene. And then I'll darken it up by using E43, E44, and E47 for the pine cones. So I'm starting with the E47 and adding a little bit of depth on kind of the bottom edge of each of the little sections that make up the pine cone. You don't have to go this detailed if you don't want to, but I just wanted to kind of draw attention to the way that they're illustrated. So I did that first, and then I'll blend out with the E44. Again, just kind of going over the edge of that E47 and smoothing out the darkest shade into the mid-tone. And then I will fill in any of that white space with the E43. So it just really makes the little layers pop, I think. But you can definitely color them, you know, just with the darkest shade down at the bottom of the entire image and the highlight at the top if you wanted to make it a little bit more simple. So I'm going to keep these shades out for my tree branches, but I'm going to be a bit more heavy-handed with this darkest shade, the E47, and add that on the underside, because that would be where the light would not be reflecting since the light is up above. And then I'm going to blend that out with the E47 again, and I'm not being like too particular with this. It's wood, so it's okay if it has a little bit of texture to it. And then I'll add in that E43 for a highlight at the top. And you can kind of see that this entire color palette was inspired by the female cardinal. I had Googled the pictures of her and really liked the color combination and just decided to build the whole card around that. For her scarf, I'm using YG41 and YG45. I'm going to end up adding in a third shade here in just a minute, but I started with these two, and then I realized that I was going to need a little bit of a highlight in the front, so I pulled out the G00 to finish that off. And I did do a second layer on that just to increase the saturation a little bit more. I thought this color combo was a good match for the stamped images above. The lighter ones I stamped in Lawn Fawn Sage Leaf ink, and the darker ones I used Noble Fir. Then I'm going to add that G00 to the edge of the snow. Wasn't quite dark enough, so I brought in G00, and that way I was able to use something other than blue that really matched this color palette. Then I'm going to take that YG45 and add a little bit of a pattern to the female cardinal's scarf just by adding some darker stripes. And then I'll come in with a white gel pen, and I'm going to add a plaid over that. So first I'm going to start by adding in some stripes right next to the darker green stripes, just following those lines that I've already added in, and then I'm going to cross that to the other direction to create a little bit of a plaid pattern. Then I'll grab a black Sakura Jelly Roll pen and go over the eye of my female cardinal since her eye is open, just to make that nice and bright and shiny. And then I will trim these images out with their matching dies. I wanted to use a stencil on my background, so I decided to pull out my new Waffle Flower 6x6 grip mat. This is my very first time using it, and I will be doing a review video on this product pretty soon, so stay tuned for that. But I pressed my panel of Bristol Smooth Surface cardstock onto the grip mat, and then I pressed the stencil down in place over top, so the parts that are not on the paper are sticky and they're going to grab a hold of that stencil. But the part that is over the paper isn't sticky, right? So it's still gonna have to be held down securely for a detailed stencil like this one. This is the Lawn Fawn Birch Tree stencil, one of them. It's a two-part, but I'm just using the one for today, and I am adding on some pumice stone Distress Oxide ink. And I want my trees to be darker at the top and then kind of fade down as we go lower on the panel. So I'm going to be concentrating my darker colors up at the top. I'm moving on now to hickory smoke. And again, just making sure to really hold that stencil in place because we have all those little lines that are sticking out, which are the indicators of the birch tree. They kind of like grab onto your blending tool, and so it constantly is pulling the stencil back up. So you just have to make sure that you're really holding it down securely so that you get a nice image. So once I'm done adding on the hickory smoke, I'm going to blend the bottom out once again with the pumice stone just to smooth out the transition between the two. And then I'm going to bring in some black soot, and I'm only going to use the barest amount of this. I started out with just what was on the ink blending tool, but there really wasn't enough left on there to do much. So I'm just inking up very lightly and then blending that on the top of the trees because I really don't want them to get too dark. I want it to be a hazy gray trees in the background, like just kind of cast in shadow. Once I have the black soot on there, I'm going to blend back out with the hickory smoke and then once again with the pumice stone until I'm happy with it. And then, like I said, I'm going to leave the bottom of the panel plain. So I'll peel off my stencil, and there you can see how that panel is looking. So now I'm going to switch to my Waffle Flower Mini Media Mat to do the rest of my blending. And I trimmed down that panel with the second largest of the Lawn Fawn large stitch rectangle stackables. And I want to create a hazy kind of sky. So I'm using my lightest shade of Distress Oxide, the pumice stone, and just adding that, towards the top and the sides. Then I wanted to add a little bit of pearlized shine for some snowfall. So I'm mixing up this shade from my Gansai Tambi Starry Colors with some water, and I'll splatter that all over the background. But I also wanted to have some whiter snow. So next I'm going to take my Dr. P.H. Martin's Bleed Proof White, and I will just take a little bit out of the jar and add that to an acrylic block. It's pretty thick, so I will mix in some more water until that's nice and fluid. And then I'm going to splatter that all over the background as well. So the white is what's really going to show up as you're looking at the card, but the pearlized shine is going to show up when you tip the card into the light, so it just gives another dimension to that snow. I'll set that panel aside to dry completely, and in the meantime I'm going to work on my sentiment. I'm going to heat emboss onto some Barn Red cardstock from Lawn Fawn. I'm using the sentiment that says Seasons Tweetings. I'm just inking that up with Versamark ink, and I did forget to treat that with my powder tool first, so I did have to brush off some of the embossing powder with a paintbrush after I coated it in my white powder. Not too much though. And then I just heated that up with my heat gun. I like to heat it off to the side for maybe 30 seconds and then bring it to both the back and the front of the cardstock. That just helps eliminate some of the warping, and I heat that up until that powder is nice and bright white. Then I'm going to pop my card base in my MISTI. I'm using some Lawn Fawn speckled eggshell cardstock, and I'm going to stamp on the inside using Sage Leaf ink. So that was the lighter of the two greens that I used for my foliage on the front. And I'm stamping the flying cardinal and the continued sentiment from the front that says "From Our Neck of the Woods." Then I'm using a piece of pattern paper that actually came in my last Lawn Fawn order. This is from the Nitpicky, but this is cut down from one of the 12 by 12 sheets, so the pattern is a little bit of a larger scale. And I am going to run that through my die cut machine with the largest of the large stitch rectangle stackables. And then I'm going to adhere that to cover the front of my card. So it's an A2 standard size card, 4 1/4 wide by 5 1/2 tall. And that's going to cover the entire front. Then I cut down another piece of Barn Red cardstock to be just slightly larger than the focal panel. And I'm going to adhere those two together so we get a little pop of red frame right around that focal panel that just really adds a nice bit of color. So I'm just making sure that that is on there nice and straight, and then I can bring in my images. I'm going to start at the bottom of this scene and work my way up. So I'm going to put my sentiment on there first. I trim that down with one of the everyday sentiment banners and then pop that up on some foam tape. And then I have these two branches, and I really need to make sure that I space these correctly so that I have room for everything as I intended it. So I'm just making sure that I know where I want those to go before I peel off the release paper. Almost all of the images are popped up on some foam tape to give a little bit of extra dimension to the scene and really push those gray birch trees even farther into the background so that they really look distant and shadowy. I'm adding a little extra piece of foam tape to the edge of the tree because I wasn't quite sure how much of it was going to hang over the side. And then I'm going to place my two cardinals. So I've got my female over on the right and my male on the left. I haven't really pushed them down too hard yet because I want to make sure I have them spaced evenly, and I need a little bit of room between them as well for my mistletoe. So that's what I'm going to add next. Just have it hanging down from the branch above. And then I'm going to take that red bow, and I did not add foam tape to the back of that because I knew it was going to go on the tree branch, which is already popped up. So I'm just going to use some liquid glue to adhere that right to the top of the stem of the mistletoe. So I actually thought when I was designing this card that I would use the mistletoe from the Christmas before and afters, but I really liked the size of the berries from this one better, so that's what I ended up using, but you could also use the mistletoe from that set if you'd like. And then I'm just going to arrange my greenery and kind of figure out my placement for that on this bottom branch. I wanted that hanging down toward the sentiment, and I wanted a mix of those little different leaves. So that's why I was kind of like fiddling around and seeing where things were going to fit together. I've talked about this before in my Plan a Card With Me videos, but when I am designing a card, I take the stamps and lay them out on a blank piece of cardstock to kind of figure out the design ahead of time and know what to stamp out and how many of each thing I might need. But there's always only one stamped image of, the different little branches and leaves and the berries and the different sizes of pine cones and things. So I can only kind of guess at how many of those things I'll need. So I'm always pretty sure how the design is going to go together for the main images. It's just these little fiddly bits, trying to figure out how many and where exactly that requires a little bit of extra time to, just decide as I'm in the moment of card making. So here I kind of veered off the plan a little bit by adding some of the foliage popping out from the sentiment down below, and I really liked how that looked. I thought that was really cute and just added a little bit more to the sentiment, integrated it more into the scene. So I'm going to do more of that in just a minute, but I wanted to add the little bits of snow to my branches. And then I had one more of these little green pine branches. So I did decide to add it to the other side of the sentiment, kind of coming up out of that, but it looked a little bit too plain by itself. So I decided to pull out that lighter green little leaf that I had placed above, coming down from that branch, and I tucked it down there instead, and then just readjusted that last pine branch and pine cone. And I really liked how that ended up turning out. So I'm gonna flip that over and trim off the edges of the branches, and then I added some foam tape to the back of this whole focal panel. So this one does have 2 layers of foam tape between this here and then also on the images. So either I will have to add some extra postage to mail it, or this will be one that I just hand deliver to one of my friends and family, which is probably more likely. But I really, really love the color palette. I'm so glad that I decided to base that off the female cardinal. I think the female cardinals don't get enough credit. You almost always see the males in pictures and imagery, but I think the females are quite pretty too. I mean, they're both gorgeous, but I'm going to add some Stardust Stickles to the snow and to the lighter green little leaves and to the mistletoe, just to have a nice bit of sparkle there. And I did add it to the pine cones as well. And I wanted to give them a bit of a frosty look. I didn't add it to the pine branches because I've done that in the past and it made the Noble Fir ink bleed, so I wanted to avoid that. But there you can see all of that detail up close, and there is another peek at the inside. I really hope you guys enjoyed this one. If you did, please be sure to hit that like button and leave me a comment down below. I'd love to hear from you. Subscribe if you haven't already, and ring that notification bell if you want to be alerted whenever I post a new video. And I do have a playlist for this holiday card series and all of my previous ones, so if you've missed any, you can go back and catch up. And all of the products I use for this card are listed and linked in the description bar below in case you'd like to pick up anything for yourself. And I will link day 8 of the previous 2 years of holiday card series right here. So thank you guys so much for spending your time with me, and I hope you had a good one. I'll see you soon in another video. Bye-bye.